Hey,
Welcome to the Tuesday Night Music Show with
it's different tonight.
me and my partner tonight, Jay Brennan. Howie may pop in later. I'm not sure what he's up
Who
to,
knows?
but we're here. So hi.
How are
I'm
you?
hiding.
We've got Jimmy in here with us tonight too, and he's a good guy to have in here with us tonight. I was thinking about some stuff last night. I mentioned it to some of the guys off air, and that was a question that I get quite a bit about what it was like to DJ in the 1980s. Some people want to know. Some people either weren't DJing in the 1980s or they weren't born yet. And since I did do this, and they are asking me, and you know how a recording artist does like a demo tape, and then they take that demo into the studio and they make it, better. We're going to call this the demo tape. I might do this video later on my channel, but I thought it'd be fun to kind of talk about this a little bit in the chat. Aaron, if you could be so kind as to turn your camera off, because otherwise you're turning up on the recording. Cool. All right. So, Jay, you were not DJing in the 1980s.
Nope.
But you have input tonight. I know you will. Jimmy, you were DJing in the 1980s.
Yep.
So you got input here. So the one thing I was thinking about, and, a lot of people want to know about the gear, the equipment. I mean, that's the first question they're going to ask. And we can talk about turntables and records and passive systems and amplifiers and things like that. That's probably the first thing we should talk about, but we don't need to spend a lot of time on it because there's more to talk about than that to really understand what was going on. So records, that was a thing. That was the main thing that we used back then.
How many crates did you bring with you on a typical gig?
Well, we had one really big crate that we'd bring, and it was large. I mean, it was probably a 60-pound crate. It wasn't a normal milk crate. It had a section in it, probably about, I don't know, maybe that wide for 12 inches and things that you needed. And then there were like 2 rows of 45s in there too, like long rows of 45s.
Yep.
And the reason that we had 45s was because you couldn't always get the radio version of a song on the 12-inch. The 12-inch would have like remixes on it or extended mixes, and that's not always what you wanted to play for your audience. The only people who really had those 12 inches with the radio versions on them were the radio stations who got the promos. And I do have some of those now, but at the time I had no access to them.
Well, remember, we were playing for music. We were paying for music full price back then. So,
Right.
I mean, a 12-inch was close to $5.
Yeah,
Anywhere
$5, $6
from $3.99 to $5.
or more.
Right?
Yeah.
Or more if you're doing imports, where you could get, pop hits on a 45 for 99 cents.
Yeah, it was $1.
Yeah, $1.50 max.
We had a store
So
here.
songs that you knew you had to play, but you weren't into it. So you got the 45 and you were good.
There was also the availability thing because you couldn't just buy anything. The 45s typically at most stores were only what was on the charts. We did have a store here in Milwaukee called Mean Mountain Music that had back issue 45s, and they would order things for you if you needed them. So yeah, I mean, there was that. And if you couldn't, for some reason, bring the record or have the record, sometimes you ended up with the cassette supplement. That was the thing. There was the halogen lighting that was different than the LED lighting we have now because of the heat that the halogen puts off.
I kindly recall them. I call them egg cooker lights.
Yeah. And you would have to turn the light show off probably 20 minutes to a half an hour before you disassembled it because it was just too hot.
Yeah.
And when you walked into a venue as a mobile DJ, and this was through the 90s too, even through the early 2000s, before I had LED anyway, when you went into a venue, you looked for a wall with two separate power outlets, hoping that they were on different breakers, because otherwise you could pop something because of the power draw from the old school amplifiers plus that halogen lighting. So, not an issue now. You can plug everything into one usually. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of how it physically worked. But what I thought would be interesting to talk about was kind of the overall culture of what was going on at the time, to really get an idea of who we were playing for and why we were playing what we were playing. And this is where I thought Jay could jump in and unmute his microphone and feel like he was a part of the conversation. I almost feel sorry for him because he just feels like he's left out in the cold in this one.
Well, I thought you were going to mention something that I learned from the DJs that trained me in the 90s were all vinyl guys.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that people couldn't understand about my sorting order was I learned from those guys. So they tended to go in sections. Like, here's my dance section, here's my rock section.
Right.
And then once we were burning CDs, I learned super quick from vinyl guys, make one CD with Megadeth, Frank Sinatra, Benny Goodman, Aerosmith, Peter Frampton, and Casey and the Sunshine Band. I'm like, why? Well, because then on the other CD, because you put two in a jewel case,
Yep.
then you can do these. Because the first CD I ever burned, I burned all the songs I wanted, like 20 songs in order.
Right.
And went to play it that night. I'm like, how am I going to mix track 2 with track 1?
Right.
So then I decided I would start doubling them. But this in the late 90s, CDs were expensive.
Well, that and
Relative.
also you didn't have time to change the CD so much.
No, so you had
So
to.
that's why
to
you
go this way.
staggered your stuff, so you didn't have to load, unload, load, unload, load, unload. You'd put different kinds of stuff.
Right. So I always
together.
knew in a sea of white, in a huge Case Logic wooden case with 4 racks of CDs, and they were in the paper jewels. I mean, I always knew, like, oh man, where's that Frank Sinatra, The Way You Look Tonight? Oh, hold on, it's going to be right here. People were astonished. I'm like, yeah, vinyl guys taught me that, because they would have just a black cover, but have to know what was there and where it was in the sequence.
Yeah. No, that was important. So you could build, like if you had an event coming up where they wanted rock, for instance, if they wanted rock, you would make 2 CDs of rock so you could bounce between the CDs instead of just 1 CD of rock. That would be the way to go.
Right.
You had to do it that way.
Yeah.
And with records, it was different. I mean, either you had the single, sometimes you ended up with the whole compilation. But I mean, like if you ended up with a Frank Sinatra's Greatest Hits, you typically weren't playing 2 Frank Sinatra songs in a row. It was okay.
Yeah, you had to break it up.
You could break it up with other things, with the Glenn Miller or with a Louis Armstrong or whatever the case might be. But the one thing that I think that is important to talk about, to really fully understand what it was like to DJ in the 80s, is the overall culture of the 80s. And first things first, yeah, you had to buy your own music, but understand you could not do this digitally because the internet wasn't around like you know it today. I remember there was this one kid in school who had a computer with a modem, and he would talk to other computers.
Yeah.
So you couldn't call him that night because he was tying up the phone line. I don't know what he was talking to the other computer about or what they were doing, but that was for geeks. That wasn't for like everyday
Message
people.
boards.
Yeah.
They were old message boards.
But it was
put the telephone down, you get into the cups.
Yeah.
You dial into the old message. I did that.
But what I'm saying is that not everybody did that. And if you did, there was nothing in there that a DJ would probably be too interested in. It was geeky stuff. It was a lot of computer talk, and it just wasn't like the internet you know now.
Right.
And nobody had mobile phones. So you had to make plans. If you wanted to call somebody on the phone, they better be home. Otherwise, you're not going to get them.
We take a lot for granted. I mean, I lost power for 3 hours tonight and couldn't get on Facebook to see why I lost power because my data is crappy here. Could only message you guys to say I might be late. couldn't send text. They were going through as SMS and not iMessage. And you suddenly are like, shouldn't be a big deal having no power for 3 hours, but it suddenly becomes a big deal because we're so accustomed to it. And I think, it's cute now to see DJs go vinyl and be like, man, I'm going to go back to vinyl. It's like, that's awesome. But you have to understand, you're going back to vinyl with a huge advantage that didn't exist when people did vinyl. It's not the same thing. I don't pretend that having Serato DJ and 2-tone pieces of vinyl is the same as you having to gamble on, man, I hope this single kills Friday night. I'm spending $5 on it. And what'd you make at a club on a Friday in the 80s?
Oh, in the 80s, Jesus. I mean, I didn't do clubs in the 80s. I was doing skating rinks in the 80s. And
what did the skating rink pay you?
Stuff. Oh, the skating rink, it was just a minimum wage job. It was nothing.
So like $4 or $5 an hour.
If,
I was doing a little better. I was making anywhere from 30 to 50.
A night.
But I did that tape thing.
You supplemented it with mixtapes.
But I'm saying, so you could, in all reality, because my very first DJ job, I got $32 a night. That's what they paid. They paid independent contractor, and then you got tipped out by the staff.
Right.
Yep.
But it was more than conceivable on a bad night that you could spend that much the next day on music.
Oh, absolutely.
How much did Porsche tip you?
On a good night in '97, on a good night, Jimmy, honestly, I could leave with $500.
There you go.
And a bad night would be like 100, and that would be a 6 to 2 a.m. shift. So it was, 8 hours. But, the view was great.
Well, without internet, without phone, and those sorts of things, people were socially very geared very different. So instead of going on some organized chat or message thread where everybody decides they're going to meet somewhere or just have a conversation in general, you went somewhere every week to see people. I know in my world, it was a skating rink, it was a club, it was something to that nature. Mm-hmm. You kind of knew who to expect to see there when you went there.
Right.
It's a bit like coming into the chill room.
It's the
certain nights. Certain people are here certain nights.
Yep, absolutely.
So you come. It's kind of like how it was. That was, you would go out. The other thing that I think is really interesting to bring up is just how fast things were changing.
Yeah.
You had music that was changing very fast. The music of 1983 sounds very different from the music of 1987.
Oh, yeah.
And I think one of the big reasons for that was there was all this technology that was coming out. So
let's not forget the M, the T, and the V. That was catapulting.
I'll get to that.
Okay.
I'm getting to that. The music itself, though, the music was different because you had all these different technologies coming out. You had 808 drum machines. You had Fairlight CMIs with the 8-bit sampler. Then you had a better sampler. Then you had a Linn drum. And then you had all these effects that were coming out. And people were trying new things with these samples and with these effects to create these brand new sounds. So not only did you have music that always sounded different, but you had music that had sounds that you'd never heard before in a way you'd never heard them before. And this is not hating on new music, but it's really hard to tell a song from 20 years ago that is now. They all kind of sound about the same. Auto-tune's there. They're rapping on it. It doesn't progress like it used to. The 80s were incredibly progressive in that matter, in that regard, with styles of music, with the sounds that you were hearing in the music. And no two songs sounded exactly the same.
The sampled orchestral stab.
Yes.
There you go.
I was a geek for that.
Yeah.
Art of Noise did it. Yes did it.
Yep.
Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis did it. And I think that was primarily Fairlight stuff they were all using for that. The CMI, which was the first music computer.
Yeah.
Stevie Wonder had one. ZZ Top used it. Pet Shop Boys used it. A lot of people used it. And then the 808, that was loose ends. And even now, people use the 808 drum machine or 808 drum machine emulator on their computer.
The 808, the 909, the 303, rhythm composers, synth bass. Yeah.
The Lindrum was always my favorite. I thought the Lindrum was the coolest sound.
The Lindrum was a heavy duty machine, man.
Well, that was like Prince. Everything like 1989 is a Lindrum album. And so was Purple Rain, a lot of it.
It was a heavy duty machine. You got to see that thing. It's huge.
Yeah, I mean, the 808 was smaller in comparison, but it was in a big rack and had wood sides on it and all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, all these new sounds that we never heard of were coming out, and the drum machines didn't sound like real drums. They sound a little different. Now, a drum machine sounds like a live drum kit. You can't distinguish it as far as tone goes from a live drum kit. Back then, it sounded very digital.
You have to thank Yamaha for that. They're the ones that got the whole thing with the sampling of I think it's an FM sine wave.
Well, the sampling just got better, and the better the sampling got, the less magical in my ears it got.
Yeah.
A lot of original material. The samples that you heard weren't samples that you were necessarily always familiar with. So now when you hear a sample, it's from a song from the 80s or the 70s or whatever. But back then, the samples were like old jazz samples that no one knew. They were obscure. They were weird. And that, like orchestral stab, like you're talking about. But the other thing that was always constantly changing was fashion. Yeah. And I know that, if you went to school one year wearing the same stuff you were in the year before, people noticed. Would they notice today? If you were wearing something that you wore last year, it's kind of the same uniform, and it's been the same uniform for a very long time. So with music and fashion, the 80s were very progressive. They were moving along. Things were happening. Where that's not so much the case now.
The group ABC comes to mind.
What about
when I think of fashion? And I don't know, they just seem to they did the androgyny thing.
A lot of bands did that.
Duran, Spandau Ballet, Johnny Hates Jazz. I said it the other night, and I still stand by it. We cared how we looked in the 80s, unlike today. I don't, it's not an arguable point. It's a feeling and an opinion that I stand behind. The 80s, it was men and women were running down the same pathway of trying to look cool, big hair, a lot of hair product, spiking stuff, using Awa Pui from John Mitchell or Paul Mitchell. And, constantly there was a lot of access to fashion, that too. But I think it came down to the music was part of the scene.
Yes.
Whereas today it's not.
Everybody that had a skinny leather tie, raise your hand.
I had about 9 of them.
No, I had one.
Sure. I had 9 of them.
Thank you.
Pink, blue, red, black, white.
Did you have the one with the piano?
No, I never got that one.
Yeah,
did you ever have the double belt? Did you have the belt that went through and then had the second belt that came around?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Like belt. Like I told you last night, I'm not man enough to admit it. 1986, my sister's like, what do you want for your birthday? I'm like, a pink lizard belt like Tubbs.
Nice.
Jay was doing the whole Miami Vice thing.
Yeah, I got into it, but it was a good look. I'm sorry, it looked cool. The white jacket, the T-shirt, you get into a Ferrari Daytona. Like, what's not to like about that?
I did a modified version of that.
I've seen the pic.
No. I used to have I had a white Kung Fu gi, and I used to wear the muscle T-shirt underneath it. The tank top.
Yeah.
Usually some bright Caribbean blue or purple or something that was striking against the white.
I think it's because the 90s came in so kind of plaid and dark and dingy because we were so pastel in the 80s.
Well, the 90s in that regard didn't happen until 92 in my world.
Well, in my world, 90s sort of started breaking because by late 80s, I was more metal than I was clubby. And the thing I wanted to say earlier was what always astonished me looking back on the 80s was the 80s ability, and this is credit to remixers, to take bands that were, I'll use Level 42. They're a jazz band. No matter how you look at the instrumentation, the chording, everything about it is very jazz driven. But yet we're out at clubs dancing to remixes of Something About You. You know,
you could say the same thing about Herbie Hancock.
But that's what I mean. Like I don't see that today as much. I don't see Drake songs, and if I do, it's the difference in technology where the artist is given stems. Like, here's the vocal, here's the bass, here's the drum, here's the guitar, here's this.
Yeah.
And then they mess with it and throw a beat and we're done.
Look at Rainforest.
Our music was so much more creative in the 80s. And year to year, forget 84 or 83 to 87, year to year, I mean, going from the Waitresses and Tommy Two-Tone in the early 80s and more of the punky stuff like the Cars, to suddenly mid-'80s being knee-deep in Duran Duran and Thompson Twins and ABC.
Right.
And then out of nowhere, suddenly you hear the Smiths, How Soon Is Now, and it's like music was a delight. And it was a decade of music that you kept finding new things and you kept being excited. Because you
it was just constantly evolving. It was evolutionary in that regard, where it was always changing, where it doesn't do that so much now.
No.
Things kind of are, and you know,
there's a formula today, Brian. There's a formula.
Well, I believe I know why. And I'm not hating on today. I didn't want this to be a now versus then thing. I want
here comes the cane.
No, I'm trying to get rid of the cane. I don't want this to be a now versus then. I just wanted to explain what it was.
Okay.
The cane is the opposite thing.
Okay.
No, I think the reason that things are maybe less progressive now than they were is because of social media, where we had a thing in the 80s that we referred to as high fashion. And it was these crazy, outlandish runway outfits that you would see that no one would wear. It was over the top. I mean, Jimmy knows because Jimmy's an artist. It was just kind of a conceptual direction of things. It was lines. It was shapes. It wasn't necessarily these items of clothing, but this is the direction that some of these designers wanted to go, and they were going outrageous with it.
Who owned zipper pants?
What would come out was toned down from that. It was a watered down, toned down version of that. Today, if you show something high fashion on social media, it gets bashed as ugly and disgusting.
Right.
And anything that even kind of looks like that goes away. So we go back to jeans and t-shirts. It's just what it is.
Yeah, and we've gotten slacky and lazy about it. I mean, Jimmy, you ever seen the movie Paris is Burning?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's a good look at a scene in the 80s of where fashion met dance, met a community that was underprivileged in their exposure, downtrodden, put away, and yet thrived in the underground scene. I look around now and try to find the underground scenes, and it seems as though there really aren't the underground scenes, because everything underground is, like you say, on social media, and now the access to it, people are driven by opinions. Like, if Kim Kardashian comes out tonight and says, I like the new Drake album, you don't think you're going to see a spike in sales?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I was thinking about the scenes as well, where you had local scenes. You had a Minneapolis sound. You had a New York sound. Several different things were going on in New York. You had Miami. LA had stuff going on. All these places Philly. Had something going on regionally. Yeah. Detroit, you name it. Something was going on no matter where you went. And then you had the homogenized thing that was MTV. That was the staple. So you go back and you think about your local scene. You think about the radio that's happening in your local scene. your radio was playing the MTV stuff that everybody kind of knows because everybody gets MTV and it's good stuff. But then you have your, whatever your local scene happens to be, that's also influencing your radio and you musically. So if you're in Chicago, for instance, you're listening to house, a lot of house, and maybe later on some techno stuff. But interestingly enough, 80 miles north here in Milwaukee, we weren't, because it was so regional. It didn't always go beyond. There was no way for it to do that. Excuse me. Like today with social media, you could do that. You could introduce other places to what you're doing. Seattle had a scene and, became the grunge thing in the 90s. Before that, it was different. Seattle was like Heart and things of that nature. But then it changed.
Queensryche. There was some metal coming out of there too. Yeah.
So that scene changed and that scene influenced other, but not every scene went beyond its borders. Not right away anyway. So when you were DJing in the 80s, you had to worry about what was going on in your scene. It wasn't nearly as homogenized because your scene might be different and your local scene might be different than what's going on everywhere else. Sure, you could do MTV. You could do Madonna and you can do Cyndi Lauper and Michael Jackson and Prince and everything else that MTV was showing you. But then you might be doing something completely different that no one else is doing as well because of what's going on where you live. In my world, it was Violent Femmes.
I was just going to say, it had to be Violent Femmes for you.
But not only that, but it was polka because of the German influence, and not the German influence from Germany in the 80s. The German influence from the German immigrants that had gotten there 100 years ago, and their families and their culture that had stuck around. Like the old German culture, we had a lot of that. And we had rock. A lot of stuff. Rockford, Illinois actually had a rock scene.
Cheap Trick.
Yeah, but then they had other bands that you don't know that we know.
The Replacements? They're your neck of the woods, aren't they?
Bad Boy was a big one. That was and still like when there's like a rock thing that those people go. Some of the members of Bad Boy were original Cheap Trick members.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Nazareth
Bad Boy
was Rockford, Illinois. I mean,
Nazareth, like Love Hurts Nazareth. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that was a scene in Rockford, which is a nowhere place in Illinois.
They still live there, by the way, the members of Cheap Trick.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
The big joke that a guy that I knew used to say is that if you go to Rockford, there's going to be a coming soon, the was it the Cheap Trick Hall of Fame kind of thing, and then and the Nazareth Hall of Fame. Like it never gets built, but it's always under construction because that's just kind of how Rockford was. Nothing really happened, so they weren't able to build their Hall of Fames. Not a very funny joke, but that was his big joke when we were drinking heavily. But it was different in that regard. So what I was getting at with that, and the reason I was bringing all that up, is the way I find DJing so different now, besides the technology that we're using, besides the lightweight stuff and the lights and all that. What sticks out to me more than anything else is if I'm doing anything from a wedding to a club, it doesn't matter what. When people used to go to a club, they would walk in the door and they would be like, all right, this is what's going on tonight. I'm going to check it out. Maybe I'm going to hear something I've never heard before. And I'm going to go with it because these people know it and I don't. Or they assume those people knew it. But the DJ was playing what the DJ was playing. They weren't doing a lot of requesting.
No.
Because DJs were the music programmers. The way that's different today is that everybody's doing their own programming.
Spotify and all that, it's ruined it for a lot of people because they're like, I already have my Spotify list. Why don't we just go with this? It's like you're kind of missing the point. That's
for better or for worse. Some people are good programmers for audiences. Some people are good programmers for themselves. Some people aren't good programmers for themselves and don't even know it. But that has so heavily influenced our jobs as DJs, where everybody's programming, or everyone's trying to program the night according to what their Spotify list looks like. You've noticed that? Of course, we've all experienced that. Didn't used to be like that.
No, you went solely because the DJ was the god in the room that could take you on a journey. And even though we still technically do that, the DJ was there to break music. Like I didn't DJ in the clubs, but I went to different clubs in the 80s And I would leave there, and in hindsight, if I could have had, Shazam back in the day, I used to have to leave the club and remember in my head what the chorus was or the line was, and then go to a record store the next day and go up to the girl at the counter who was
that song that goes da 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 da.
We got this song last night. Do 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 do.
What is
it? Had a girl singing and a guy. She's like, "Oh, that sounds like Utah Saints, or that sounds like this, or that sounds like that." It's like,
yeah.
Oh, let me check it out. I mean, we didn't have the distraction of the internet. We didn't. Our goal was music. It still brings me more joy than anything, and I have access to so much on the computer now. But I still miss the days of stumbling in. That's what I like about Twitch. It's like the 80s to me, because I can go to different rooms, which to me are different clubs, and hear something that I didn't expect to hear or I didn't know. And I think that's why the music knowledge of people in the 80s was better than today.
I don't know if it was better or worse. I know that I was a geek about it because I was really into it. The one thing that I wanted to kind of back up on a little bit, you said when you go to a place, the DJ was kind of the god there. I always thought of more like the club was the church. Like that was the place where you went, and that's the people you wanted to see, and that's the atmosphere you were comfortable with. It was everything. It was the people there. It was the atmosphere. The DJ. I remember one of my favorite clubs in the old days. I'll just say it like that. The DJ, I think his name was Tim, but I mean, he wasn't like the focal point. It was the music. You didn't even see the DJ. He was way up in the air in a booth. You had to try to find him and usually get through some kind of security to get to him because they didn't want anybody up there bothering him. It was a different vibe. Now the
don't know where he is. That's describing God, Brian.
No, but I'm just saying, it's not like you go there because of the DJ. You went there because you knew the club was good.
Oh, right. But if the DJ stopped playing music, the fun and excitement of the club would die very quickly.
The clubs
I'm just saying they were guiding the evening oftentimes. They would read the floor, like learning how to read a crowd was watching a DJ. The difference between 11 and 12 at a club in the 80s was huge. 12 was like all hell's breaking loose. 11 o'clock was you're kind of ramping up. And I could tell, did the crowd guide the DJ to get to 12? Or did the DJ knowingly come into it going, when we get to peak hour 12, I am dropping this track and this place is going to explode?
Well, I know that there were nights that I wanted to go and other nights where I'd go and I wasn't as impressed. And I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was the crowd that was there or the DJ, but it was a combination of all of those things.
Right.
You had to have both. People were important and the music was also important. But the other thing that I wanted, just the perception of how important music was back then, because it was very important. With no internet, video games were 8-bit, and you may have had the luxury of having a television set in your room as a kid with a video game set up next to it if you were into that. Not everyone was, but some people were. But there was always a radio or a stereo in there.
Oh, yeah.
Boombox.
I didn't have TV in my room till I was in my 20s.
But that was the center point of the room.
But I had a stereo.
Even if you had video games, you were listening to music while you were playing them.
Yeah.
Like that was the big deal. Now, what is it? A desk where you maybe have your gaming computer, if you have that, or a place to set your laptop, or a charging station.
But Brian, the main difference that you haven't touched on, and very quickly, people today don't own music. I have two teenagers in the house. They don't own a song.
Right.
Everything they listen to is streamed through service. Like they don't even get when I show them the CDs in the, huge plastic container out in the garage, and they go, "Why do you keep those?" I'm like, "Yeah, I may go back to CDs, and I there's probably tracks I haven't burned yet." Yeah, but just get it online. Just go online. Like go online. I'm like, and no, because this is different. Because trust me, I'll go online and I'll Shazam things and find it's not in print anymore.
Yeah.
I Shazammed something on an old Anthony Bourdain, New Jersey episode, and you know what? I can't buy it. And it sounded amazing. And Shazam had it, but I can't go get it.
You know that track, Jimmy, that Molka Soul track that you like, I'm Losing You? You can't download that anywhere.
No, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I had to seek that.
All you could do is rip it from
me.
From
YouTube. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, there's no place to buy that.
I bought this on Amazon last month because I had to have Hey Joe, their version of Hey Joe by Jimi Hendrix, by a band called Common Sense from Orange County, California. And you know what happened? I couldn't get it on YouTube, iTunes, Amazon, but I could buy a CD. So I bought a CD for $9. Greatest $9 I've spent this year.
But you know, the difference between you and maybe your kids is that you know that you can actually go that route and it'll work.
Oh, yeah.
You know what? I just can't get it. You're like, you can, but you have to get it on this media.
But the sad thing is, I know what it is. They don't.
Yeah, yeah.
They're only knowing what they're given. Like, they're not walking in the door with, you know, they go through their mumble rap period, so they look up mumble rap. They go through a house period. Connor's driving around with yacht rock playing. He's more into CCR and Skynyrd and Tom Petty than I ever was.
Mm-hmm.
And he's 19. So I'm like, good for you, kid. That's great music.
Yeah.
But I try to tell him, I'm like, hey, check it out. The JoJo Gunn. Check this out. Run, run, run. You got to hear this song. Ooh, check out Black Oak, Arkansas. Check out this track. And because I feel it's my job to educate anybody behind me that may not know the great music of the day. You know, we joke about things, you know, but the reality is there's a generation of people on this planet that if I drop a needle on 38 Special Hold On Loosely, they are awash with memories of girls in high school. And those memories aren't going away because now they're in their 50s and 60s and beyond.
In the 80s, I think that it was very much about now. It was less about the memories than it was in my world.
But the music created the memories then, because that's an 80s.
Now you have memories of it, yes. But at the time, it was about the now. I mean, that was my observation in my world. It was about trying to stay current in every way. And it wasn't about a lot of going back. Going back was fine. There was some great stuff. But you know what? There was so much new stuff. There wasn't time to go back. Now I go back a lot because I'm just not always getting the diet that I feel like I need with new music. I go back a lot. But if there was really good new music happening, I wouldn't be going back. Right. Anytime if there's been great music, I don't go back. I didn't go back in the 2000s because there was so much music that I was just in love with. I couldn't get enough. Yeah. I didn't have time to listen to all the great music that was coming out. So I wasn't, you know, reminiscing so much and going back to old tracks. But when there's nothing going on, I can always go back.
No, but I'm saying those old tracks now were the new tracks then.
Well, of course they were.
And they hit you like a hammer sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I remember asking people, like physically saying like, hey, you know, what are you listening to? What do you got? What do you get? You know, like you're trying to find weed on the street. Like, hey, man, what do you got? You got anything? You got anything for me? You got anything? Just so I could expand. I remember going to a record store and buying the 12-inch album, the entire thing of Utopia. Feet Don't Fail Me Now, because I had to have a song called Libertine. 2 minutes and like 40 seconds long. I think I spent $10, went home, dropped the needle, and then found the rest of the album was amazing too. But I bought it for 2 minutes and 40 seconds.
We're gonna have
That's worth $10.
We're gonna do something about that shirt of yours.
What's wrong with his shirt?
The noise it makes every time he moves, because he's very physical when he talks.
Oh, this
shirt.
It
rubs against his collar.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I'll leave it out here. No, I
get
think
really excited. It's funny.
I think the way you cultivated the music, you had the DJ in the club, you had the audience in the club,
mm-hmm.
and then you had, if you were lucky, you had a local station that you followed, and then a college station that you followed.
Oh, yeah, the college stations were wonderful.
Completely different.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's where you learned about REM and all that on a college station.
That was one of the big differences, I think, in the city, because all those college stations, most of them were very low watt. I mean, you didn't get them outside of the campus.
No.
Some of them you might get citywide, but you wouldn't get them in the burbs, for instance. So the burbs, they were only soaking in the mainstream radio stations and MTV. That's what they got. But then the college radio stations were getting all this weird stuff.
We had Emerson College where, like, you know, Jay Leno went, Dennis Leary went. A lot of comedians went to Emerson. It's a communication college. And they had a show on Fridays and then Sundays called Nasty Habits with Mike Jones. And he would play heavy metal. But he would play like Metallica, Fade to Black, before anyone knew who Metallica was.
Right.
So he was doing that kind of stuff. And he held a residency every Wednesday at a club in Kenmore Square, Boston, called Narcissus. Because I worked at the Harvard Coop, and we were the #1 music distributor in the state, maybe on the East Coast, because we had great buyers that were buying out of Europe. Every time the Coop would get metal, they would come give it to me. So I'd get all these clear cassette tapes, like early release clear cassettes. And I would go to see him and say, hey, you got the new Accept? He's like, yeah, it's not out till next month. And I'm like, and he would play it on Emerson radio. Like the college station would play a cassette that some idiot kid on a Wednesday night gave the DJ, and then he gave it back to me the next week. You couldn't do that now. That's a 90s, early 2000. Now you put your own music out on your computer, on your own label. You're a star. You're big on TikTok. But the days of hustling music and actually having music go around a club, go around a scene, I think that's another point. You know, you guys made mixtapes. I made mixtapes for girls.
Yeah, that's pretty much.
Like,
I didn't make them to sell them
mixtape.
to. No, I didn't go the Jimmy route where I was selling them to people at the club. I never did that.
Right. But you could get music in your hand and physically give it to somebody else. I mean, all those metal bands got big because of fanzines where people would trade tapes. Now, my question to you is, was there a dance version of that? Because I knew of that in the 80s, throughout the 80s, of underground metal. You know, Anthrax was trading tapes with people from New York to Boston. You would write a letter, put a stamp on it, put a SAISY, self-addressed stamped envelope inside, send it, and you would get back a cassette. Was there that in the dance community?
I don't know that existed. It probably did, but what I remember is, well, okay, so a lot of my friends were a little older, so I was having the college experience in dormitories and things well before I should have been in college. You know, in junior high school and high school, I would go spend the weekends or whatever with my friends at college.
Jeez, in their dorm. Was it a John Hughes movie or something? Junior high, you're hanging out in dorms. This is a John Hughes
I did that in 6th grade with my sister. That's another story. So, yeah, we'll talk about that another time.
Show off.
So I'm not showing off. I'm trying to tell you that's where I was able to meet people from Chicago who were bringing house records to school. And that's how I was introduced to house music. I was introduced to other artists through my friends who went to, much like yourself, an all boys school. A friend of mine who went to Catholic seminary.
Yeah.
But he had a lot of the kids he went to seminary with were from Chicago, and they were bringing up weird stuff like Art of Noise or whatever. That's like, what is this? And we were hearing it that way. And I believe that's how I first started hearing some of the freestyle. Some of the stuff that I was hearing, like at skating rinks, for instance, was a lot of electro. Houdini, I don't know, Trinier, Debbie Deb, LA Dream Team, that kind of stuff. You didn't hear it anywhere else. Nowhere else did you hear that except skating rinks. You know, so if you were a skater, you knew electro and freestyle. If you weren't a skater, you'd have to go to a freestyle Latin club to check that stuff out. And that's what Latin clubs were playing at the time, by the way. In my world, they weren't doing salsa merengue, they were doing freestyle.
Right.
So that's just kind of how it was.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, because I'll forget this point. Did your clubs have a thing called private night?
No, not a private night.
Boston on Sundays or on a Thursday or a Wednesday, a lot of the bigger clubs would have it would just say private event. And that was code for gay night.
Oh,
so I found out, I bartended at, John will know this one, Avalon, Metro, Boston. I think it was Avalon when I was there on a Sunday. And it was like, what the hell is this? Like, where is this music coming from? To the point where I would, with some guys, be like, we got to go. It's a gay bar. I'm like, no, it's the club. It just happens to be a gay night. But we're going to hear the best music you've ever heard.
We actually, in Milwaukee, have always had, as long as I've lived here anyway, a real solid gay club scene.
Right. But I think when you're 22, it's easier and more palatable, maybe, or comfortable to feel like it's a club I normally go to, but tonight's a different audience. Then, hey, let's immerse ourselves in the culture and find out what they're doing. Because, you know what I mean?
The big one in Milwaukee it's still around, and it's different owners. It's called Lacage, and every suburban kid thinks the place is called the LA Cage, like it's an LA club or something, but it's
like La Cage aux Folles.
Yeah,
yeah.
But
Jeffrey Dahmer hang out there.
All the suburban kids think it's the LA Cage. It's an LA based nightclub.
There you go.
Anyway, I remember, I don't know, when I was there one time when I was pretty young, I was talking to one of the managers, and I had said the word gay club. He says, "Hold on a minute. No, we are a club. A lot of people here happen to be gay, but it's just a club."
Yeah, that's why they didn't call it gay night. It was private event or private night, which is kind of disparaging in a way, instead of just saying mostly guys with guys.
It was the same vibe, though, because when I would go to Lacage, because I went to Lacage, I knew people who worked there, and I had gay friends. I would go there.
Right.
It was amazing. I saw people at this club. I saw women at this club.
Yeah.
That I never saw at any other club.
No, that was also in our head.
Gorgeous.
That was also in our head. Like, you know what? They're not leaving with any of these guys. So
it was a safe place.
And they're not leaving with this guy either.
It was a safe place.
Yeah.
Because nobody was going to bother them. They were there, maybe they were models or something. I don't know. But they were just breathtakingly beautiful women.
Yeah.
That you didn't see at any other club at any other night. You saw them there.
Yep.
So I would I met all kinds of women at these clubs. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. Yeah. Because they assumed that you were gay, and then
you play that card. Yeah, come home and
I didn't play the card.
It looks good.
It was always by accident. I was nice to everybody, but they were more open to talk to you.
Yes.
You'd say hi to them, they say hi back, and they sit down and talk to you. You said hi to a pretty girl at a regular club, they'd think you were, oh well, what's this guy want? He wants something from me, and I'm not going to talk to you.
Now, Brian, your opening line is, "Hey, excuse me, does this smell like chloroform?" That's your opening line.
Their guard was down regardless, so they were more social. It was
no, totally.
It was kind of the same vibe you're talking about, but it was every night at these particular places.
Oh yeah,
and that was through the 90s too.
And I've DJ'd in the 90s in some of those clubs because of my affiliation with the hotel that I've told you about. And it was just, like 14 straight years of doing New Year's Eve with up to 800 men in a room. And let me tell you, you want to call yourself a DJ? I'll let you know if you're a DJ. One simple gig: go DJ a gay night in a club. You'll find out very effing fast if you're a DJ, because you need to switch gears very quickly. You need to read the crowd very quickly, and you need to be open-minded about, I'm going down this road, now I'm going to go here. And eventually, when you're on point, then you take the club over.
Yeah, they're all, every place
joyful.
Every place has a different vibe.
No one is bitching you out about, oh, dude, you got to play Drake next. Nope.
No, you don't have that.
Nope.
But I mean, I wanted to just kind of, hammer this point home about DJing in the 80s before we wrap the show. And that is, if I really had to tell you what the difference was between now and then as a DJ, aside from the equipment, forget about the equipment, forget about how I had to get music, forget about all those things. I really think that the big takeaway for me and the big difference that I experience today is that my programming skills, which I feel like are strong, were more appreciated then than they are now, because everybody wants to program now because they can do it on Spotify for themselves. So they think they're an expert at it. As did I as a young DJ, thinking that I knew everything based on my personal taste. I'd play songs, they would fail, and then I would know, hey, wait a minute, you know what? Maybe that's not for everybody. Maybe that's just a me thing. Let me get into their heads and figure out what they want and play to that audience. I can't tell you how nice it was back then to be able to go into a room, a club, a party, know that the vibe was going to be freestyle, rock, top 40, new wave, whatever. and do it without anybody bothering you about it, without anybody challenging you or telling you that they can do a better job.
No.
That was nice. That was the cool thing about DJing in the 80s for me. What sucked about DJing in the 80s? The heavy stuff, trying to locate things in a pinch, spending several hours out of your day every week going to different record stores and flipping through things and which I like to do, but I'm not obligated to do it anymore. It was cool to do it, but I don't have to do it now. So it's nice that I don't have to do it. It's nice that I did have the experience of doing it though. So
I think there's something to be said for having it all in front of you. And I use the chef DJ analogy all the time and the metaphor. And, if you gave me and a master chef the same ingredients, the same kitchen, the same pan, everything the same, with the same exact recipe, do you really believe my dish would taste as good? And if you do, then I think that's illusion, it's a little bit delusional. But now with music, what I enjoy, and I not showing off, I got hired today by a new client for October 22nd of this year. And he was adamant about, in the beginning we want something maybe like for cocktail. We're thinking something like EDM, but like chillish. I'm like, oh, some down tempo like this, and I named like 5 acts. Yes, we love that. Perfect. Then let's do this for dinner, and I'm trying to create. He's like, okay, this is exactly what I was hoping for.
Right.
Because we know what we want, but we're not sure what it is.
That's cool.
And that's the beauty of it, where you can come in and be like, over the weekend I Shazammed 100 songs. I went and saw the videos. I went and bought a few of them, and now I've got new ammo in my arsenal.
Right.
Now I've got something new I can play for you and go, oh, that's perfect. What is that? Oh, that's this. Before, you really couldn't go out of your way to start grabbing vinyls. And plus you didn't have a cell phone, so it wasn't like,
you got lucky. But there was something to be said for, necessity being the mother of invention. When you were in a spot and you only had what you had to work with in front of you, but you knew what it was.
Yeah.
And you made it happen.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the real difference between now and then, is really understanding what's in front of you. You got a lot more in front of you now. But even myself,
or isn't always better.
Well, not only that, but you don't really know what it is.
Right. Yeah. If you don't know what you don't really know. Yeah. You can drive a car, but it doesn't mean you can drive a Lamborghini well.
When you had to go to the store on a Tuesday and find this and talk to a clerk and talk to some other people to figure out what you actually were looking for and what the title was and what mix you needed and everything else, you knew what you had. When you had money spent on it, you invested that much time to find it. I mean, you knew what you had.
90s, going to swap meets to pick up CDs and get soundtracks, because you weren't getting that In Vogue song unless you bought the soundtrack. You weren't getting, the Queensryche track unless you bought Ford Fairlane. I wanted to mention that. That's a good point. Yeah.
And before we wrap the show, that was just one other thing that I thought was weird in the 80s that you don't see anymore. And that is, they used to break songs on movie soundtracks for films. Original songs for films were on the charts. It was made for this movie. It was made for Footloose. It was made for Purple Rain. It was made for Vision Quest.
Against all odds.
Yeah, Against All Odds. Yeah, exactly. Which wasn't a great film, but it was a great song.
Great soundtrack.
Yeah, but just the songs did really well. The songs promoted the movie.
Exactly. So there was, Footloose.
Right.
Look at the hits that came off of that
soundtrack. Gosh. And they were made for the movie.
Right. The Kenny Loggins, I'm Free. I think that's like the most underrated song in the soundtrack.
It's a great tune.
That's an awesome song.
My jam off of that one is still, my jam off of that one is still Dancing in the Sheets, Shalimar.
That's a great track. But I mean, there's about 7 great songs in that movie.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing with Ford Fairlane was Queensryche released Last Night in Paris. Well, guess what? That's not on an album.
I don't think Billy Idol's Cradle of Love is on an album either.
No, it's not. That's another one. You had to go buy that soundtrack. It was a great way of diverting money. It's like when they came out with the singles, and you're like, I could just buy the cassette. This one has an acoustic version on the backside. Oh.
An amazing soundtrack was Bright Lights, Big City, which was not a very good film. I didn't like it. Kiefer Sutherland, Michael J. Fox, it overpromised and underdelivered. But the soundtrack, you got Mars, Pump Up the Volume, which there was no album for. You get this, you get the 12-inch single, or you can buy that. Prince's Good Love, which appeared on nothing else that Prince did. Brian Ferry, Kiss and Tell.
Yep. Which was on his Bête Noire. I will say that.
Was it?
Yeah, that did get released on Bête Noire, but it didn't get released until after.
Until later. Yeah. They broke the single on the Bright Lights Big City.
Well, the movie
I have a couple copies of it.
What is it? Is it what's the movie with oh shoot. The guy that was like in everything for a little while, he's kind of dorky. Christian Slater. Oh. Where he plays the DJ.
Pump Up the Volume.
Pump Up the Volume. And one of the tracks is Concrete Blonde, Everybody Knows. And I'm like, oh, I'm like literally I heard that in the movie. I'm like,
really
right out
down. You pitched it down huge when he was playing it in the movie. I remember that.
Yeah. But I'm like, oh, need to buy this. Need to buy that. And the best way you could sell something was to say it's only available on.
Right.
And we ran. Well, I mean, Brian, look at the difference. They were talking about Tower Records in L.A. and they were showing highlights of the past.
Right.
When albums would drop at midnight, Tower would open and only sell that. Yeah. They had them lined for like a mile when Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 broke. And you could stand in line, buy them, and walk out with 2 CDs in your hand and then run to your car, rip them open, and shove them in the radio.
Right.
Like, and everyone's like, what's on it? Well, you know that song, You Could Be Mine from Terminator 2? Yeah, that's on this one. Oh, I want that. Well, have you heard Estranged yet? No. Oh, then get the other one too. Oh, I'll get both.
I would do that. Let's see. I did it for a couple of Madonna albums. Lenny Kravitz, I was in line for Lenny Kravitz stuff, and the Prince stuff I get in line for.
But tell that to a 23, 24, 30-year-old DJ today that only knows the digital realm.
Yeah.
Just imagine. Oh, the other day, we're talking about Yukon Jack in the chill room last night. I drank that in college once in 83, in February 1983, standing in line outside the Boston Garden to buy tickets to see Aerosmith. Because if you stood in line when the ticket booth opened the next morning at 6 a.m., you could get better seats. Because again, we didn't have the internet. We couldn't get on our phone. Just
going back a little bit before we close that section out and we wrap the show, I was talking about the movie soundtracks that were built around new songs. Like they take a movie and you build songs around the movie. Where now it's a lot of retro stuff. It's songs that have already existed that go on the soundtrack.
Guardians
of the Galaxy is a really good example of that. I can't think of a song that's like, oh, that's from the movie. It's a new song. The last one I can think of that was like that was like an original song that really grew legs, of all things, was Frozen's Let It Go. It's the last one I can think of. Disney did it a little bit. Sometimes they do it with like Rascal Flatts' Life is a Highway, which is a remake of a Tom Cochrane.
Remake of a Tom Cochrane, yeah.
Smash Mouth did it with I'm a Believer. There are some things like that.
Yeah.
But that's Disney.
But they're not writing the song for the movie. Well, you know what? I think I told you that night that I mentioned the Scritti Politti because of the key change from Tim Pierce. And I mentioned, he does the mandolin and the slide solo on Iris.
Yeah, we were having that.
And we were talking about how they screened the movie and they had Alanis Morissette and Johnny, can't remember his last name, from Goo Goo Dolls, watch the screening.
Right.
And say, hey, go back to your hotels. Let us know if you have anything. And the next day, there's a cassette demo where Johnny plays the entire song of Iris.
Right.
Give Up Forever to Touch You, just like goes through the whole thing. Alanis Morissette did, was it Thank You?
Uninvited.
Or Uninvited. Like, that was a thing then. Mm-hmm. They took talent and said, here's a visual. What do you got? Now it's like, okay, what was a hit in 1972? Let's take the same chord change, same key, tune it down one step. You write a rap over it. I'll put an 808 on top of it. Look, #1 hit.
Well,
I mean, no one wants to hear me close the set with this, but that's why today the music isn't as good as the music was then.
Well, that
isn't.
Really, yeah. Well,
we should have a show where we battle #1s from 2010 to 22 and 1980 to 1990 and just see by audience participation.
Who's that kid who's always trying to impress me? What's his name? That DJ, that kid who's always trying to.
I'm not saying his name. No,
you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know you.
Yeah, he challenged me to that one time.
Did he really?
Oh yeah. He and I'm like, okay, give me the year. Give me the year pre 2011 or pre 2010, and you take any year you want, and I'll challenge you. He took 2011. He gave me 1993, and I still smoked him. 93 was a weak year.
93 was a very weak year.
Anyway, that's it, guys.
Good music.
Thanks so much for watching. I don't know what John's going to call the show or what.
Yeah.
93 was a weak year. Hopefully, Kyle's has nothing to do with like that 4 minutes of the topic, which was DJing in the 80s. Comma, whatever Jay says.
I'm going to share a song with you.
Okay.
Don't get us taken
down. Don't play it. No. Turn it off. We're recording.
They'll flag Jimmy.
Us.
They'll flag us.
They'll flag us. You can't do it.
We're not.
I thought you just said goodbye.
No,
I haven't logged off yet. I'm trying to say goodbye.
Okay.
Wow, Jimmy, learn the rules. Jeez.
All right, guys. We'll see you next time.
Peace.